The morning I lost my life started just like any other. I'd been working the night shift at the Bradford manufacturing plant for 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Yeah, I kept count. Not because anyone was handing out medals, but because numbers gave shape to a life otherwise swallowed by monotony. 7 years of standing at Station 47, feeding raw polymer sheets into the relentless jaws of the pattern generator Mark 9. 7 years of the same ritual. Wake at 7 p.m., choke down my ration paste, walk a precise 14 minutes to the factory floor, stand, feed, listen to the machine's endless grinding hum. The factory stretched farther than the eye could see, a cathedral of industry where 10,000 souls bowed daily to the machine god. Steam hissed from overhead pipes like some percussive orchestra accompanying our every move. The air tasted like metal shavings and recycled breath. My hands were roughened and calloused from handling the polymer sheets, and my back had curved into the slight stoop needed to work comfortably at my station's height. Station 47 sat smack dab in the middle of production line Alpha 7, flanked by identical stations manned by identical workers. To my left was Jack, a thin fellow whose nervous habit of counting under his breath was as familiar as the machine's drone. To my right was Mary, who was so silent I sometimes wondered if she'd forgotten how to speak. We never talked about our lives before Bradford. There was no point. The work devoured every scrap of thought and energy, leaving no room for memory or hope. The overseer's voice crackled through the intercom at the exact same moment every shift. Production at 97% of target. Unacceptable. Increase output by 12% or face ration reduction. No malice, just cold bureaucratic certainty. The quotas always climbed. They never dropped. I'd adapted to the rhythm completely. My body moved on autopilot. Hands feeding polymer sheets, counting 3 seconds, feeding again, feed, count, like a mechanical metronome. Around me, 9,999 other workers performed their own variations of the same dance. The mash of metal on metal, hissing steam, conveyor belts hauling finished goods. It was the soundtrack of my existence. I can't say I was unhappy. Happiness felt like a foreign concept, irrelevant in the business of survival. I was fed, housed in Dormitory Delta 7, Level 3, Cell 941. I had my regulation coveralls, boots, and ID tags. My life had structure and purpose. The Imperium provided, and in return we gave our labor gladly. Every shift, at midpoint, the prayer blasted through the intercom. Blessed is the machine, for it serves the Emperor. Blessed is the worker, for we serve the machine. Blessed is our service, for through toil comes redemption. The words had worn thin, but their routine brought comfort. I spoke them without thinking, as natural as breathing. My cell was 2 meters by 3, containing a cot, a small locker, and a waste bin. The walls were rough concrete stained by decades of occupancy. A single flickering light strip was there when needed. I had the luxury of solitude, a perk for flawless compliance. Most workers bunked 3 or 4 to a room. The food was adequate, ration paced with different chemical flavorings each week. Monday was artificial strawberry, Tuesday synthetic beef, the rest of the week cycled through subtler, less distinguishable tastes. I'd come to prefer the plain paste. The artificial flavors felt like a bad joke. The paste came from vats tended by nutrition servitors, dispensed through automated stations. Recreation time lasted 2 hours each cycle. Most workers played worn card games or dice made from scrap metal in communal areas. Some gathered to hear readings from approved texts, usually technical manuals or religious tracts. I preferred to retreat to my cell, lying still and listening to the factory settle around us. Rats scurried through walls, water dripped from corroded pipes, distant machines hummed tirelessly. Sleep came easily then, exhaustion guaranteed rest. Dreams were simple, wandering through spaces larger than Bradford, beneath skies I'd never seen but somehow remembered. Faces appeared, people whose names I'd forgotten but whose presence felt warm. These dreams faded upon waking, leaving only faint impressions of something lost but not mourned. After 7 years, my routine was perfect. I knew every step from cell to factory floor, the maintenance servitor schedules, the best times to avoid the washing facilities crowds. Change seemed impossible. Bradford had existed for centuries and would long outlast me. Workers who grew too old or sick were quietly reassigned. No one spoke of where. New arrivals filled empty stations, usually young folks from the upper levels who had failed to secure better jobs. They learned the rhythm quickly or disappeared. I had no reason to expect anything different. That morning, I woke to the harsh klaxon at 7 p.m., a sound drilled into my muscles. Regulation coveralls first, then boots, then ID tags. The small mirror above my locker showed a face I barely recognized anymore. Weathered by factory air, marked by years of chemical exposure. I walked down 3 levels via cargo lifts through Corridor Gamma Prime, past the shrine to the machine god where incense burned before an ancient coprocessor. Left at Junction 7, right at Junction 12, through the final checkpoint where servitors scanned our tags. The same route, the same steps, 7 years, 3 months, 16 days. Station 47 waited just as I'd left it 8 hours earlier. Polymer sheets stacked neatly beside the machine intake. The pattern generator hummed quietly. Green lights flickered on the control panel. Everything in place for another cycle serving the Imperium. Jack was already counting softly. 47, 48, 49. His litany had paced my days. Mary stood silent, moving with mechanical precision that had made her the line's best worker for 3 years running. The overseer's platform was empty, but surveillance servitors tracked our every move. The first hour passed exactly as expected. Feed. Count 3 seconds. Feed. Count 3 seconds. The rhythm synced with my heartbeat, a meditation that made time vanish. Steam hissed overhead, the pattern generator sang its grinding song, and my lower back ached, settling into the day's work. Then came the disruption. It started as a discordant note in the factory's symphony. Marching footsteps, sharp and synchronized, echoing through corridors built for industry, not military precision. Voices barked orders. Workers glanced up, breaking rhythm for the first time in memory. The overseer appeared early, flanked by unfamiliar figures in dark blue uniforms with silver insignia. Planetary defense officers. Their presence turned the factory floor alien and threatening. Workers who had stood confidently now looked small, vulnerable. The intercom crackled. Attention all workers. By decree of the planetary governor and in accordance with Imperial conscription protocols, the following individuals will report immediately to Processing Station Alpha for induction into military service. Names echoed across the vast hall, each one a blow separating another soul from the safety of routine. Jack Harris, Station 46, Alpha 7. Jack stopped counting mid-number, mouth agape in shock. His voice, the background soundtrack of my life, was gone. Mary Collins, Station 48, Alpha 7. Mary stepped back, whispering something too soft to catch, her perfect efficiency suddenly meaningless. The list continued, names from every section, every skill level. No pattern in age, performance, or health. Just raw numbers pulled like lottery tickets. Marcus Kelly, Station 47, Alpha 7. My name. The sound hit me like a punch to the gut. After 7 years, 3 months, 16 days of invisible existence, I was noticed. The machine at Station 47 suddenly seemed foreign, as if I'd never seen it before. The polymer sheets I'd been feeding were relics of another life. I stepped back, following those called before me. It felt wrong, like defying natural law. For years, this spot had been my world. Now I was walking away. Someone else would take my place. The weight of that thought pressed heavily on me. The corridors to Processing Station Alpha were unfamiliar, walls painted institutional green instead of rusty orange, the air smelling of disinfectants, ink, and fear. We were herded past administrative offices where bureaucrats managed paperwork with cold efficiency. Processing Station Alpha was a large room filled with metal tables and scanners. Planetary Defense Force officers moved among us, reducing human lives to data points, height, weight, health, literacy, mechanical aptitude, recorded with impersonal precision. I was assigned to Table 17, overseen by Sergeant Major Vex, a woman whose weathered face told stories of thousands processed before me. She spoke without looking up, expecting immediate compliance. Full name: Marcus Kelly. Age: I hesitated. Time measured in shifts and quotas, not birthdays. 28 standard years. Previous military service? None. Specialized skills? Factory work. Pattern generator operation. She jotted notes, occasionally glancing up to assess me. Questions stretched on. Family status, education, health. Each answer narrowing my fate. A servitor conducted medical scans. Mechanical voice announcing, physically suitable for standard infantry service. Recommended assignment: frontline combat unit, siege warfare specialization. The words meant little then. I'd heard of the Imperial Guard from propaganda, but military life was a separate universe from the factory floor. Tests of knowledge and reaction time followed, all cold and efficient. Some were rejected for combat roles, assigned to support or return to stations. Most, like me, were funneled into the grinding war machine. For hours dismantled the life I'd built over 7 years, redirecting me from factory worker to conscript. I became conscript 4,471,892. Delta Infantry classification, pending assignment. My name remained, but it belonged to someone else now. The final stage involved issuing basic kit, a cloth bag with regulation undergarments, water bottle, eating set, and a thin booklet titled Basic Military Doctrine for new conscripts. The pages were cheap, smudged easily, filled with orders and diagrams of proper stance. We swapped our worker badges for heavier, unfamiliar dog tags stamped with our conscript numbers. Captain, name unknown, addressed us with practiced boredom. You are now property of the Imperial Guard. Your previous lives are ended. Your service begins immediately. Transport to Training Facility Gamma for basic combat preparation. Questions will not be answered. Compliance is expected and enforced. 2 minutes to erase everything familiar and replace it with obligations I didn't understand. 53 former workers, now military resources, stood waiting for orders that would decide if we lived or died. The transport arrived within the hour. A massive ground vehicle with bench seats, no windows, rumbling engines that swallowed conversation. I sat near the front, between a young man from the atmospheric systems and an older woman with scarred hands, silent and resigned. The factory disappeared behind us as we climbed through the hive's levels, passing residential zones, commercial districts, and administrative centers I'd never glimpsed before. For the first time, I saw lives beyond the factory, a recognition that other existences were possible, and I had never been offered the chance. The journey to Training Facility Gamma lasted 6 hours, following winding highways past checkpoints where guards verified our papers. Gamma sat on the hive's surface, low, functional buildings surrounded by razor wire fences and guard towers. Inside, the processing was even more thorough. We were stripped, decontaminated, and issued rough, ill-fitting military uniforms. Green canvas fatigues, boots needing breaking in, awkward belts. Our belongings: worn prayer book, faded photos, my father's mechanical watch, disappeared into storage lockers marked with my conscript number. The barracks housed 60 conscripts in 3 long rows of bunks with lockers beneath. It felt larger than my cell, but the close quarters offered no privacy. Every breath, every movement was exposed. My bunk was in the middle row, surrounded by conscripts from different sectors: water reclamation, air circulation, food processing. We were the hive's workforce repurposed for war. That first night was sleepless. The sounds were wrong: voices instead of machines, fabrics rustling instead of metal grinding. The air was thick with too many bodies and chemical cleaners. Darkness was broken by safety lights and patrol flashes. I lay on the thin mattress trying to grasp the change. 18 hours ago, I was a factory worker with a defined role. Now, I was a soldier in training for killing and dying. Around me, others coped their own way. Some wept quietly, some lay silent, some whispered memories of homes left behind. Fear was everywhere: fear of training, combat, death. It was rational but offered no comfort. Exhaustion finally brought sleep, but dreams were chaotic. Factory machines merging with battlefields. Uniforms shifting from coveralls to combat fatigues without warning. Morning came with the harsh klaxon, more aggressive than the factories. 59 conscripts stirred, some rising immediately, others nudged awake by early risers. The barracks filled with the cacophony of dressing, washing, preparing. Communal washing was cold and harsh, mirrors of polished metal distorting reflections into unfamiliar faces. I studied my own, trying to reconcile the factory worker and the soldier in the mirror. Breakfast was served silently in the mess hall: protein paste, carb wafers, vitamin supplements, and a bitter stimulant tea. Training sergeants watched for signs of insubordination or camaraderie, discouraging conversation. We were being forged into tools, and tools didn't need friends. The training staff arrived, 3 sergeants and a lieutenant, all battle-hardened and efficient. Lieutenant Herrick laid out the brutal truth: 6 weeks of basic combat training to prepare us for active duty. Many wouldn't make it through. Fail, and you'd be reassigned or discharged with a scarred record. Training began immediately. We were marched to the armory and issued Loss rifles, simple but deadly energy weapons balanced for quick firing. Sergeant Vex, the same woman who processed me, ran weapons training with a no-nonsense edge. "This rifle will keep you alive if you treat it right," she said, stripping and cleaning her weapon with practiced ease. "Ignore it and it'll kill you. Choice is yours." The first day was all about handling and maintenance. Disassembly, cleaning, inspection, reassembly. Like factory work, it was all about rhythm and precision. Feed. Count 3 seconds. Feed. Count 3 seconds. Disassemble. Clean. Inspect. Reassemble. The rhythm was different, but the discipline, the repetition, was familiar. Physical training was tougher. Running, climbing, carrying heavy gear, it was a world away from standing at a conveyor belt. Obstacle courses tested endurance and teamwork. My body ached in new ways, muscles unfamiliar with exertion. Some adjusted quickly. Others failed and were reassigned. Combat training began in week 2, basic infantry tactics, moving as a unit, using cover, coordinating fire. Sergeant Collins, a lean man with campaign ribbons, taught with weary urgency. "The enemy wants to kill you. Not personal. They just don't like the Imperial Guard uniform. Your job? Kill them first and kill them better." We started with laser bursts on static targets, learning stance, breathing, trigger control. I discovered an unexpected talent. Steady hands and focus developed over 7 years at the factory translated well. Targets got harder, moving, fleeting, shooting while moving or under stress. The hardest part was human-shaped targets. It felt wrong to aim at a silhouette resembling a person. Sergeant Vex watched me struggle. "The enemy won't hesitate. If you can't shoot this, you won't survive." She was right. I learned to see targets as problems to solve, not people. Week 3 brought group tactics. Squads of 10, led by temporary leaders chosen by performance. My squad mixed workers from across the hive, different backgrounds, skills, and fears. Squad movement was complex. Supporting each other, coordinated fire, evacuating wounded. Communication was critical: vox gear, hand signals, verbal commands, all had to be instant and flawless. Our squad leader, Yelena Voss, former atmospheric supervisor, led with calm decisiveness. Under her, we became a unit, not just 10 individuals. Week 4 introduced heavier weapons and specializations. Some trained on crew-served weapons, demolitions, comms gear. I stayed with standard infantry, Loss rifle, and basic gear. Maintenance became key: field repairs, improvisation, endurance under stress. Training grew more realistic: live fire exercises, simulated casualties, sleep deprivation, ration limits. One brutal exercise involved assaulting a fortified position with full gear and minimal rest. I moved with practiced efficiency. The Loss rifle felt like an extension of my arm. Our squad acted as one. The exercise succeeded, but exhaustion and injuries were stark. Week 5 was combat medical training: graphic, practical, disturbing. We learned first aid, stopping bleeding, treating shock, stabilizing fractures under fire. Simulated wounds triggered nausea and anxiety at first, but necessity overcame discomfort. Treating wounds required mental armor, like shooting human-shaped targets. Final week combined all skills in comprehensive combat scenarios: assault, defense, withdrawal. something fundamental shifted. Hesitation vanished. Reactions became automatic. Targets appeared, we fired. Orders came, we obeyed. Casualties happened, we carried on. Training complete. Graduation was a brief ceremony. Officers spouted speeches about duty and honor. We stood in formation, anonymous components ready to be installed in the war machine. Assignments followed immediately. I opened my envelope with steady hands. Report to Subsector Command Station Gamma 77 for immediate active combat assignment. Transport departs 0600 hours. No personal effects authorized. Active combat. No room for mistakes. That night, I lay on my bunk, trying to grasp what had happened. The factory worker I'd been seemed like a ghost. The soldier I was becoming was unfamiliar. Others coped differently, writing letters, telling stories, or retreating into silence. Sleep was fitful, dreams mixing factory machines and battlefields, coveralls and combat fatigues. At 0600, the transport arrived, a troop carrier designed for efficiency, not comfort. Inside, we were cargo shuffled toward unknown fates. The engines rumbled, drowning conversation. Outside a small viewport, I saw stars fade as we left familiar space behind. Stops at way stations shuffled passengers and supplies further from home. At the third station, orders updated. Gamma 77 overrun by hostile forces. Reassignment. Forward operating base Tertius on Cathra Prime, where pacification operations raged. I knew nothing of these places, but such changes were routine. The final leg was aboard a military cargo hauler. Functional, stark, no frills. Tertius sat on a plateau, surrounded by open terrain. The base was temporary but secure, with prefab buildings and guard towers. I was assigned to 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company, 43rd Cadian Infantry Regiment. The unit's reputation preceded it, battle honors, hard-fought campaigns. My squad leader, Sergeant Corvain, was a scarred veteran missing an eye. He examined my records with a wry nod. Factory worker, good. You understand machinery and procedures. Combat is just machinery with moving parts. Follow procedures and you'll stay breathing. The squad had 12 soldiers bonded by months or years together. I was the outsider, the unknown variable. Our first patrol was before dawn. Sergeant Corvain briefed us, 20 kilometers of rough terrain, suspected enemy territory. We checked weapons and gear with mechanical precision. The Loss rifle was familiar now, a tool as natural as breathing. We moved out quietly, scouts ahead, main body following, rear guard covering. The landscape was harsh, rocky, sparse vegetation, favoring defenders. 3 hours in, contact erupted, automatic fire from concealed positions. We scrambled for cover behind boulders. Corvain's voice crackled over the vox. Contact front. 2 or 3 automatic weapons. Thane, flank left. Squad, suppress fire. I crouched behind a rock, firing at muzzle flashes. The rifle bucked against my shoulder with each shot. After 10 minutes, the enemy fled, leaving gear and blood stains. We cleared the area, finding no bodies, wounded enemies evacuated. We collected equipment and logged intel. I'd fired at people for the first time, killed or wounded strangers whose faces I'd never know. No triumph, no trauma, just necessity. The patrol continued 6 more hours, uneventful. Back at base, Corvain debriefed us. My conduct was satisfactory, competent but unexceptional. Combat became routine, patrol, contact, fire, return, report. The rhythm echoed factory work, repetition, discipline, survival. But survival was random. 2 weeks later, Private Kelly was killed by sniper fire. I helped carry his body back, the process clinical and detached. His effects were shipped home, his tags logged. A replacement arrived, a young woman from the Hive's industrial sectors. She looked like I had, uncertain, inexperienced, fragile. She struggled with equipment and procedures. On her first patrol, she nearly compromised our position with a vox mistake. She was killed a week later by an IED. I applied first aid, but it was hopeless. She died calling for her mother. The cycle continued. Soldiers died, replacements arrived. The war consumed lives with mechanical efficiency. Skill and training helped, but death came to all. I ceased to believe perfect performance guaranteed survival. I functioned as part of the squad, accepting each patrol might be my last. The war dragged on, territory lost and gained with no meaning. Supplies were irregular, news bleak. Letters from home felt alien. The factory where I'd worked now churned out ammunition. I wrote no letters. The soldier I'd become had no past or future beyond the next mission. Winter brought harsher fighting, ambushes, artillery, sniper fire. My fire team dwindled. Soldiers killed or wounded in endless attrition. Offensive operations loomed, massive attacks planned with tanks and air support. The night before, I wrote a letter to no one, capturing thoughts I'd never share. At dawn, artillery pounded enemy positions. We advanced through smoking craters. Resistance was lighter than expected, but enemy counterattacks struck hard. I took shelter in a shell crater, separated from my team. Confused reports filled the vox, casualty figures rising, orders contradictory. The battle dissolved into chaos. Night fell. Enemy infiltrators gained key positions. The attack stalled and was called off. We withdrew under fire, evacuating wounded at great cost. Casualties totaled 37% of our strength. Our fire team was destroyed. I was reassigned to a composite unit. The war limped on, stalemated and brutal. Letters from home were sporadic and irrelevant. The factory worker was dead. The soldier remained, a cog in an endless machine. Spring brought fresh conscripts, faces like mine from a year ago. I guided them as best I could, knowing most would die quickly. The cycle was unending. The next offensive awaited, promising more bloodshed. Lying in my shelter, listening to preparations, I thought of the morning my life ended. The transition had seemed sudden, but it was inevitable. The Imperium needed soldiers, and I was ready. I checked my Las rifle one last time. Clean. Loaded. Familiar. It was my lifeline, my instrument of service. Far off, artillery pieces rumbled, readying the dawn barrage. Their shells were made in factories like Bradford by conscripts like me. The cycle was perfect and complete. Hours before dawn, I heard the enemy moving. They would fight desperately as we would. This was the fate of the drafted. Consumed by war, stripped of self, remade as function. No peace awaited, only endless conflict. The factory worker was dead. The soldier would die soon. But the Imperium would endure. And the war would go on. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon as I tightened the straps on my gear, the chill of the early morning biting through my uniform. The barracks were alive with the quiet stirrings of soldiers preparing for what might be their last day. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery grew louder, a grim symphony signaling the start of the offensive. I stepped out into the cold air. The ground beneath my boots cracked and scarred from previous battles. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy with low-hanging clouds that promised little relief. Around me, my new fire team gathered, faces pale but determined. Among them was Tommy, a wiry lad from the lower hives, his hands trembling as he checked the safety on his Las rifle. Beside him stood Eleanor, a tall woman with fiery red hair pulled back into a tight braid, her green eyes sharp and unwavering despite the tension. We were a motley crew, patched together from the remnants of shattered squads, each of us carrying the weight of loss and the silent question. Who would make it through today? Sergeant Corvain appeared, his scarred face set in grim lines. "Listen up," he barked, the authority in his voice cutting through the morning fog. "This isn't a drill. The enemy's dug in deep, but we've got orders to push forward. Stay sharp, watch each other's backs, and remember your training." As we moved out, the landscape revealed itself in brutal clarity. Twisted metal, shattered trees, and craters filled with stagnant water. The air smelled of smoke and burnt earth, a harsh reminder of battles past. I couldn't help but notice Eleanor's boots, scuffed leather laced tight, the hint of a silver anklet catching the faint light. It was a small defiance, a touch of individuality in this sea of uniform sameness. The march was silent except for the crunch of gravel and the occasional whispered command. Tommy's nervousness was palpable. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting death to be lurking just out of sight. I tried to offer a reassuring nod, but found my own heart pounding in time with the distant explosions. We reached the first objective, a ruined farmhouse that served as an enemy observation post. The sergeant signaled for us to spread out. As I moved along the broken fence line, I caught a glimpse of Eleanor's profile, her jaw set, a bead of sweat tracing a line down her temple despite the cold. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the north. Bullets kicked up dirt and splinters, and the world exploded into chaos. Tommy dropped to the ground, shouting orders I barely registered. I raised my lost rifle, the familiar weight steadying my shaking hands. We returned fire, the laser bolts cutting through the smoky air. Eleanor moved with surprising grace, taking cover behind a crumbling wall and returning precise shots. The acrid smell of burnt ozone filled my lungs. The firefight was intense but brief. The enemy withdrew, leaving behind the shattered remains of their outpost. We caught our breath, counting heads, tallying wounds. Tommy's lip trembled as he whispered, "Is this what it's always like?" Before I could answer, a sharp pain lanced through my side. I staggered, the world tilting. Eleanor caught me, her touch firm yet gentle as she steadied me against the rubble. Her voice was low, urgent. "Hold on, Marcus. Medics are on the way." Pain blurred the edges of my vision, but I clung to the moment, the feel of her hand, the weight of the lost rifle still warm in mine. Somewhere beyond the chaos, the distant rumble of artillery continued, relentless and unyielding. As medics arrived, the sergeant barked orders to press forward. I was torn between duty and survival, between the man I'd been and the soldier I was becoming. Lying on the stretcher, I caught Eleanor's eyes once more. There was something unspoken there, a fragile connection forged in the crucible of war. The battle was far from over, and so was my story. The medic's hands were firm and practiced as they pressed a makeshift bandage against my side, the fabric dampening with my blood. The pain throbbed sharply, a relentless reminder that this war wasn't just about orders and missions. It was about survival, raw and brutal. I lay on the stretcher, the ground vibrating beneath me as distant artillery fire rattled the shattered landscape. Each explosion a grim heartbeat in the symphony of battle. Eleanor crouched beside me, her eyes scanning my face with a mixture of concern and something I couldn't quite place. Was it fear, hope, or the weight of shared fate? Her breath caught in the cold air as she whispered, "You're going to be all right, Marcus. Just hold on." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I'd make it through this day, through this war. But somewhere deep inside, I felt the fragile thread of hope fraying. The medics worked quickly, loading me into a field ambulance that jolted and bucked over the broken terrain. The interior was cramped, filled with the groans of wounded men and the sterile scent of antiseptic. A nurse with tired eyes adjusted my foredrip, offering a faint smile that didn't quite reach her weary gaze. As the ambulance sped toward the aid station, I drifted between consciousness and oblivion. Flashes of the factory flooded my mind, the endless hum of machines, the monotony of feeding polymer sheets into the hungry pattern generator. That life felt like a distant dream, a ghost haunting the edges of a reality, now consumed by fire and blood. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the vehicle, throwing us sideways. The ambulance skidded to a halt, metal groaning under the strain. Shouts erupted outside, mingled with the crackle of gunfire. "Stay down!" the nurse yelled, pressing a hand to my forehead. "We're under attack." My heart pounded as I struggled to sit up, the pain in my side flaring anew. Through the small window, I saw figures moving, enemy combatants closing in, their faces obscured by makeshift masks. The aid station was no sanctuary. It was a battlefield. The nurse grabbed a nearby medical kit and shoved a compact pistol into my hand. "If you can fight, you fight. We're not going down without a fight." I swallowed hard, gripping the unfamiliar weapon. The cold metal felt foreign, yet somehow grounding. Outside, Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos. "Marcus, Hold on. We're coming for you. The world narrowed to sights and sounds. The staccato of gunfire, the sharp reports of pistols, the cries of wounded men. I raised the pistol with trembling hands, aiming at shadows darting through smoke and dust. A figure lunged toward the ambulance door. I fired, the blast echoing in my ears. The figure crumpled, and for a moment, silence fell. But the battle was far from over. As reinforcements arrived, the enemy retreated, leaving behind a trail of destruction and unanswered questions. The nurse helped me from the vehicle, her grip steady despite the chaos. "You're tougher than you look," she said with a wry smile. I managed a weak laugh, the sound strange in the smoky air. Eleanor joined us moments later, her coat torn, eyes blazing with relief and determination. "We're not done yet," she said, pulling me toward the makeshift triage tent. "And neither are you." Inside, the medics worked swiftly to stabilize me. The pain dulled under heavy sedation, but my mind raced with thoughts I couldn't silence. The factory worker I'd been was gone, replaced by a soldier caught in a war that demanded everything. As darkness fell over the battlefield, I realized this was only the beginning. But beneath the pain and fear, a seed of something new took root. Resolve. Whatever came next, I would face it, because there was no turning back. The dim glow of the triage tent cast flickering shadows across the faces of wounded soldiers and exhausted medics. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, sweat, and something metallic. Blood, of course. I lay on a makeshift cot, the rough fabric scratching against my bruised skin, my side still throbbing beneath the bandages. Despite the haze of painkillers dulling the worst of it, every breath reminded me that the war was no abstract nightmare. It was a living, breathing beast gnawing at my very core. Eleanor sat beside me, her green eyes bright but shadowed by fatigue. She was dressed down from combat gear to a loose-fitting gray smock, the sleeves rolled up to reveal lean, strong arms. A silver chain peeked from beneath the collar, a small charm shaped like a gear, maybe a nod to the factory we'd all left behind. Her fiery braid was undone now, strands framing a face that somehow managed to be both fierce and tender. "Don't think you're getting out of guard duty just because you're hurt," she teased softly, reaching out to brush a damp lock of hair from my forehead. I tried to smile, but the ache in my ribs made it a grimace. Lucky me, the tent was a hive of controlled chaos. Nurses and medics moved with practiced urgency, tending wounds, adjusting for drips, and whispering prayers to whatever gods might be listening. The groans and murmurs of the injured formed a haunting chorus, a litany of pain and resilience. A young medic approached, clipboard in hand, his face pale but resolute. "Marcus Kelly? You're lucky to be alive. The surgeons want to keep you here for observation. Internal bleeding's a risk." I nodded, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. I'd never considered myself lucky before. Maybe I was starting to understand the word. Outside, the muffled sounds of distant artillery rolled like thunder, a grim reminder that the front lines were never far away. Somewhere beyond the canvas walls, the war raged on, indifferent to the suffering beneath. Hours passed in a blur of whispered conversations and shifting shadows. Eleanor stayed by my side, occasionally slipping out to fetch supplies or exchange words with the medics. Her presence was a tether to reality, a small island of comfort in a sea of uncertainty. At one point, she pulled from her pocket a small, battered photograph. It showed a younger version of herself, standing beside a man in a worn factory uniform. "That's my brother," she said quietly. "Lost him last year. Same war." I studied the photo, the smile frozen in time, a stark contrast to the world we now inhabited.
"I'm sorry."
She shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Sorry doesn't bring them back, but it reminds you why you fight." The tent flap rustled, and Sergeant Corvain stepped inside, his one good eye scanning the scene. His scarred jaw tightened when he saw me. "You're not getting out of this so easy, Kelly. We have a mission at dawn. You're expected to be on your feet." I tried to protest, but Eleanor shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "Let him heal." Corvain grunted but relented. "Fine." But don't think this means you're off the hook. The sergeant's presence was a reminder that war had no sympathy for the wounded, no patience for weakness. As night deepened, exhaustion claimed me, dragging me into fitful sleep. Dreams came unbidden. Machines humming, factory floors stretching endlessly, then morphing into battlefields scarred by fire and blood. I saw faces, lost comrades, silent and watching. A voice echoed, distant yet clear. The war changes everything and nothing. I woke to the harsh light of early morning filtering through the tent. Eleanor was already awake, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the base. "Ready to get back out there?" she asked, her tone light but serious. I nodded, steeling myself. The war had taken so much already, but surrender was not an option. Outside, the world waited, battered, brutal, and unforgiving, and so did my fate. The morning air was sharp and cold, biting through the thin fabric of my uniform as I stepped out of the medical tent. The base buzzed with activity. Soldiers preparing gear, vehicles rumbling to life, and the distant thud of artillery setting the rhythm for the day. The sky above was a steel-gray canvas, heavy with clouds that threatened rain but held back, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for the inevitable storm. Eleanor was already at the muster point, her red braid now tied back with a strip of worn cloth, boots scuffed from days in the field. She wore that same silver gear charm around her neck, catching the pale light like a talisman. Her sharp green eyes met mine, a flicker of relief passing between us. No words were needed, we both knew the day ahead would test everything we had. Sergeant Corvain barked orders with his usual gruff efficiency, organizing us into squads, reminding us of the objectives. "Stay tight, watch your sectors, and trust your mates," he said. "We're pushing through enemy lines today. No room for mistakes." My body protested with every movement. Stiff muscles, lingering pain from the wound, but adrenaline pushed the exhaustion aside. I adjusted my gear, checked my Las rifle, and found my place in the formation. Around me, the faces of my fire team were set hard, eyes steeled against the unknown. The march to the front was a grim procession through shattered terrain. Twisted metal, burnt-out vehicles, and the skeletal remains of what once might have been homes. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the crunch of boots on gravel and the distant rumble of heavy guns. As we neared the enemy's last known position, the tension coiled tight in my chest. Eleanor moved beside me, her steady presence a balm against the creeping dread. I caught a glimpse of her worn leather gloves, fingers nimble despite the grime and cold, and a faint scar tracing along her wrist, a mark of past battles. Suddenly, the world erupted in chaos. Explosions rocked the ground, sending showers of dirt and debris into the air. Bullets whizzed past, sharp and unforgiving. We dove for cover behind a shattered wall, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling my nostrils. "Contact front," Corvain shouted, voice cutting through the cacophony. "Suppressing fire. Flank left, Corporal." I raised my Las rifle, the familiar weight steadying my shaking hands. The rhythm of battle was a brutal dance. Aim, fire, reload, move. The recoil thudded against my shoulder as laser bolts tore into enemy positions. Eleanor was a force beside me, moving with precision and grace, picking off targets with deadly accuracy. Her voice called out coordinates and warnings, a lifeline in the storm. The firefight was intense, each second stretching into eternity. I felt the sting of near misses, the ground shaking beneath us as shells exploded nearby. Time fractured into fragments. Sounds, sights, sensations, each demanding split-second decisions. When the enemy finally broke, retreating under the pressure of our assault, a shaky cheer rose among the squad. But relief was fleeting. The cost was written in blood and silence. Wounded comrades, empty spaces where friends had stood moments before. As we regrouped, Corvain's voice was grim. "We hold here until reinforcements arrive. Stay alert." I sank against the rubble, muscles trembling, heart hammering. Eleanor crouched beside me, offering a quick nod that said everything. Survival was a shared burden. In the eerie calm that followed, I found a moment to glance down at my hands. Calloused, scarred, steady. The same hands that had fed polymer sheets into the pattern generator now gripped a weapon, wielded life and death. A strange thought crossed my mind. Perhaps the machine god I'd once served had only changed form. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the shattered battlefield. As dusk settled, a creeping unease took hold. Reports crackled over the Vox. Enemy reinforcements were inbound, and the night promised no respite. I exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Looks like the fight's just beginning. She smiled grimly. Welcome to war, Marcus. The darkness swallowed us, but the war's relentless pulse beat on. Nightfall draped the battlefield in a thick, suffocating blanket. The fading light painted the ruins in shades of gray and black, shadows stretching like fingers, ready to snatch the unwary. The air was cold and still, broken only by distant echoes of gunfire and the low murmur of voices filtered through calm chatter. Somewhere nearby, artillery thundered like an angry god, shaking the earth beneath us. I crouched behind a shattered wall, every muscle screaming with fatigue and pain. My breath came in shallow bursts, clouding in the frigid air. The Lost rifle rested heavy in my hands, its familiar weight both a comfort and a grim reminder of the night's dangers. Across from me, Eleanor moved silently, her figure outlined against the flickering light of a nearby flare. Her dark combat jacket hung open at the collar, revealing a hint of a lace-trimmed undershirt. Small rebellion against the drab uniform. A flicker of humanity in this desolate place. She caught my gaze, a brief smile tugging at the corner of her lips. You holding up, Marcus? I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. As well as can be expected. The squad was on edge, every sense straining for the slightest hint of enemy movement. Night operations were a different beast. Visibility was poor, shadows played tricks, and every sound was amplified in the silence. The enemy knew this terrain well. Ambushes were a constant threat. Sergeant Corvain issued quiet orders, assigning sectors for watch and patrol. Keep your eyes sharp. No surprises. I volunteered for a perimeter sweep, eager to distract myself from the ache in my ribs and the gnawing fear in my gut. Eleanor handed me a small flashlight, its beam weak but enough to cut through the darkness. The ruined street was a skeleton of its former self. Cracked pavement, twisted rebar, and shattered glass sparkling faintly. I moved carefully, footsteps muffled against the rubble. The night was alive with sounds. The rustle of wind through broken windows, the distant howl of a stray dog, the occasional drip of water from a shattered pipe. Suddenly, a faint whisper of movement caught my attention. I froze, heart pounding, senses alert. A figure emerged from the shadows. A young man, ragged and gaunt, eyes wide with fear and desperation. He raised his hands slowly, voice barely audible. I'm not your enemy. Please. I lowered my rifle slightly, tension easing just a fraction. Who are you? Name's Tom, he whispered. Local. Been hiding since the fighting started. Can help you know the tunnels beneath the city. Eleanor appeared beside me, eyes narrowed. How do we know you're not leading us into a trap? Tom's gaze flicked nervously between us. You can't trust anyone out here, but the tunnels. They're the only way to move unseen. I can guide you. Corvain's voice crackled over the calm, sharp and impatient. Kelly, Voss, status? I exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Trust was a luxury scarce as clean water here, but survival demanded risks. Got a local contact, I replied. He says he knows the tunnels. Proceed with caution. Extraction point in 1 hour, Corvain ordered. The three of us moved cautiously, Tom leading the way through narrow alleyways and debris-strewn streets. The tunnels yawned before us, dark, damp, and smelling of earth and decay. Eleanor flicked on a compact headlamp, the beam cutting through the shadows. As we descended, the weight of the surface world slipped away. The hum of distant artillery faded, replaced by the steady drip of water and the echo of our footsteps. Tom's knowledge was uncanny. He navigated twists and turns with ease, avoiding collapsed sections and hidden pitfalls. Yet, beneath his guidance lay an undercurrent of fear, a silent warning that these tunnels held secrets darker than the war above. Halfway through, a sudden noise, a metallic clang, echoed behind us. We spun, weapons raised, hearts pounding. Tom's eyes darted nervously. We're not alone down here. The darkness closed in, and the true test of trust and survival began. I realized then that in this war, the enemy wasn't always the one in uniform. Sometimes it was the shadows themselves. The clatter echoed again. Sharp, unforgiving, reverberating through the narrow tunnel like a death knell. We froze, breath caught in our throats, eyes straining against the dim glow of Eleanor's headlamp. The air was thick with damp and dust, every sound magnified in the confined space. "Stay close," I whispered, heart hammering. My fingers tightened around the lost rifle, the cold metal grounding me amid the rising panic. Tom's face was pale, his eyes darting wildly. "We've got company," he muttered. "Scavengers? Or worse?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Which is worse?" Tom swallowed. "Both want the same thing, what little supplies we carry. And they don't take prisoners." A low growl rumbled from deeper within the tunnel, sending chills down my spine. Shadows shifted, twisting into forms that lurched toward us. Ragged figures clad in scraps of old uniforms and scavenged gear, faces obscured by grime and desperation. "Ambush!" Eleanor hissed, raising her rifle. The tunnel erupted in a cacophony of laser fire and shouted curses. Lost bolts zipped through the stale air, ricocheting off damp walls. I fired blindly, the familiar rhythm of combat taking over. Aim, squeeze, reload, move. One scavenger lunged, wielding a jagged pipe like a club. I sidestepped, slamming the butt of my rifle into his jaw. He crumpled, snarling as he hit the ground. Eleanor moved like a shadow, precise and deadly, dispatching foes with quick bursts. Tom ducked behind a rusted support beam, clutching a rusty knife, eyes wide with terror. The fight was brutal and close quarters, the confined space offering no room for error. I felt the sting of a graze along my arm but pushed it aside, focusing on survival. After what felt like an eternity, the last scavenger fell, disappearing into the darkness with a final, guttural cry. Silence reclaimed the tunnel, broken only by our ragged breathing. Eleanor lowered her weapon, scanning the shadows. "Is everyone still breathing?" I nodded, wiping sweat and grime from my brow. Tom was trembling but alive. "We can't stay here," I said. "The tunnels aren't safe." Tom nodded. "There's an exit not far ahead, a service hatch near the old industrial district." We pressed on, the weight of the encounter settling like a stone in my gut. The tunnels had been a refuge. Now, they were a gauntlet. As we approached the hatch, a faint light flickered ahead. A warning or a trap? I couldn't tell. Tom hesitated. "This way." The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow shaft leading up. We climbed, muscles burning, lungs heaving with dust and effort. Emerging into a derelict factory yard, the night air hit us like a blast. The sky was a slate canvas, stars obscured by smoke and haze. Distant gunfire punctuated the darkness. Eleanor surveyed the area, eyes sharp. "We've got to move. Enemy patrols will be sweeping soon." Tom looked around nervously. "I can lead you through the back alleys to your extraction point." We followed him through winding streets, shadows swallowing our footsteps. Around us, the city whispered its secrets, graffiti-stained walls, shattered windows, the scent of decay and forgotten lives. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a rifle echoed nearby. We dropped into a ditch, hearts pounding. "Contact!" Eleanor hissed, returning fire toward a silhouetted figure on a rooftop. Bullets stitched the air as we scrambled for cover. More voices shouted orders in a language I didn't recognize. Enemy reinforcements closing in. Trapped between hunters and hunted, I realized survival depended not just on skill, but on trust in comrades, in strangers, and in the fragile hope that tomorrow might come. As the firefight intensified, a shadow detached itself from the chaos. a figure cloaked in darkness, moving with lethal grace. Our fate hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of a blade. And the war's cruel hand was far from finished with us. The shadow moved with a predator's silence, slipping through the chaos like a wraith. My heart slammed against my ribs as I tracked its fluid motion, every instinct screaming danger. Eleanor's eyes locked onto the figure, narrowing with deadly focus. "Stay sharp," she whispered. "That's no ordinary patrol." The firefight around us blurred into a cacophony of gunfire and shouted orders, but my attention was fixed on the newcomer, an enemy scout or something worse. Clad in dark, patched armor that seemed to absorb the dim light, the figure advanced with uncanny speed and precision, dispatching foes with silent efficiency. Tom whimpered beside me, clutching his side where a bloodstain blossomed beneath his torn shirt. "I don't think I can make it much farther," he gasped. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "We're not leaving anyone behind." The scout vanished into the shadows just as reinforcements poured into the street. Soldiers in jagged uniforms, faces obscured by visors that glinted like cold steel. The enemy was closing in, and our window to escape was slamming shut. Corvain's voice crackled over the comm, strained but clear. "Extraction delayed. You're on your own. Find alternate route and regroup at Point Delta." Panic threatened to rise, but I clenched my jaw. "Alternate route," I repeated. "Got it." Eleanor scanned the ruined buildings, eyes sharp for any opening. "That way," she said, pointing toward a collapsed warehouse roof. "We can crawl through the rubble and lose them in the maze." We sprinted toward the wreckage, bullets pinging off metal and stone around us. I felt the sting of a graze on my leg but pushed forward, adrenaline drowning the pain. Inside the warehouse, darkness swallowed us whole. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mold. We moved cautiously, limbs scraping against broken beams and shattered crates. Tom stumbled, collapsing against a pile of debris. "I can't," he gasped, voice breaking. "Go without me." Eleanor shook her head fiercely. "No. You're coming." I dragged him to his feet, supporting his weight. "We're a team," I said. "We survive together." Deeper into the labyrinth of wreckage, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by eerie silence. For a moment, hope flickered. Then, a low rumble shook the ground, a warning tremor spreading through the ruin. Eleanor's eyes widened. "The whole place is unstable. We don't have much time." Suddenly, a massive beam groaned, then crashed down, blocking our path. Dust and splinters filled the air, choking and blinding us. Coughing, I reached out, fingers brushing against Eleanor's arm. "Alternate exit?" She nodded toward a narrow crawl space barely visible beneath the rubble. We squeezed through, limbs aching, hearts pounding. Emerging onto a deserted street bathed in moonlight, the city's ruins stretched before us, silent witnesses to countless forgotten battles. Ahead, the faint glow of a Vox beacon marked Point Delta, our fragile promise of safety. But as we hurried toward it, a cold chill ran down my spine. From the shadows, the scout reappeared, stepping into the pale light with a faint, cruel smile beneath a cracked visor. "Looking for me?" The voice was low, mocking. The war was far from over, and this enemy had plans that went beyond bullets and blood. The moonlight glinted cold off the cracked visor of the scout as he stepped into the open, his presence a dark stain against the desolate cityscape. His armor, worn but deadly, seemed to absorb the faint glow, making him look less like a man and more like a shadow given form. The faint smile beneath the visor was a cruel promise. This confrontation wasn't just about survival anymore. It was personal. Eleanor instinctively raised her lost rifle, fingers steady despite the tension. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice sharp as broken glass. "What do you want with us?" The scout's laugh was low and hollow. "Names don't matter here, soldier. What matters is the message." He gestured behind him, and from the darkness, several figures emerged. Enemy operatives, their weapons trained on us with ruthless precision. Tom groaned weakly, clutching his side, sweat slicking his pale face. "We can't fight them all," he whispered, voice barely audible. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. Then we don't fight them all. Without hesitation, I grabbed Eleanor's arm. We split up. You two head for the beacon, find help. I'll hold him off. Her eyes flashed with protest, but I shook my head. No arguments. It's the only way. Eleanor nodded grimly, pulling Tom toward the flickering Vox beacon that promised salvation. As they disappeared into the shadows, I faced the scout alone, the final line between us and capture or worse. The scout advanced slowly, weapon raised but movement deliberate, almost theatrical. Brave, he said. Foolhardy, but brave. I raised my lost rifle, the familiar weight steadying my resolve. I'm not here to play games. The battle ignited in a burst of light and sound. Laser bolts streaking through the night, ricocheting off crumbling walls. We danced a deadly dance, each movement measured, each shot a test of skill and will. He was fast, too fast, anticipating my moves, countering with lethal precision. But I had something he didn't. Desperation. The raw, unyielding need to survive, to protect. Dodging a blast, I lunged forward, slamming the butt of my rifle into his helmeted face. The impact sent him staggering, but he recovered quickly, retaliating with a vicious strike that knocked me to the ground. Pain exploded in my side, but I pushed through it, rolling to my feet. The world narrowed to the rhythm of our fight. A brutal symphony of strikes and parries, light and shadow. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the chaos. Eleanor's voice over the Vox. Marcus, extraction's here. Hold on. The scout snarled, eyes flashing beneath the visor. We're not done yet. But before he could strike again, the distant roar of engines filled the air. Armored vehicles burst into the street, their headlights cutting through the darkness like blazing swords. The enemy hesitated, then melted back into the shadows, retreating with a final, venomous glare. I collapsed against the cold pavement, breath ragged, body trembling. Eleanor and Tom rushed to my side, relief flooding their faces. Thought you were a goner, Eleanor said, voice trembling. I managed a weak smile. Not yet. As the extraction team secured us, the scout's words echoed in my mind. A promise of more battles, mysteries yet to unravel. For now, we were alive, but the war's shadow stretched long and deep, and the next chapter was waiting in the darkness. The armored transport's engines thrummed beneath us, a mechanical heartbeat pushing us away from the shattered streets and into the uncertain night. Inside, the air was thick with exhaustion and relief, a fragile mixture that hung between the wounded and the weary. I lay back against the cold metal bench, muscles trembling, the weight of the day settling heavily on my chest. Eleanor sat close, her hand finding mine in the dim light. Her fingers were cool, steadying the storm inside me. Around us, the muted murmurs of other soldiers wove a tapestry of shared survival and silent mourning. Tom rested beside us, pale but breathing steady, his eyes closed as if willing the pain to fade. Outside, the world we'd fought to escape faded into darkness, the distant fires of battle flickering like dying stars. As the transport sped forward, my mind drifted back. 7 years feeding polymer sheets into the relentless machine, the factory's ceaseless grind, the quiet prayers to a god of metal and steam. That life felt like another lifetime, a ghost slipping further into shadow. Now I was something else, a soldier shaped by fire and blood, bound to a war whose purpose was too vast to grasp. But beneath the uniform and the scars, a question lingered, sharp and insistent. What had I become? The scout's words haunted me. His promise of battles yet to come, secrets lurking in darkness deeper than any battlefield. I glanced at Eleanor, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the console lights, fierce and unyielding. We survived, she said softly. But this is just the beginning. I nodded, squeezing her hand. Somewhere in the distance, the war raged on, endless, merciless, consuming all in its path. The machine still turned, and we were caught in its gears. As the transport vanished into the night, a silent vow settled over me. No matter what came next, I would fight. Not just to live, but to remember who I was beneath the uniform. Because in a world ruled by war, memory was the last refuge of the soul. And mine was not yet lost. Somewhere ahead, the next battle waited. But for now, in the fragile quiet between storms, I closed my eyes and dared to hope. The war would continue, but so would I,